Hello, everyone. I'm Archana Pai Kulkarni, and I welcome you to SheThePeople.tv's Women Writers Fest. Today, I'm deeply honored and extremely happy to be in conversation with Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati ji. We will talk about her wonderful book, Hollywood to the Himalayas, and her incredible journey. Pranam, welcome Sadhvi ji, and it's such a blessing and gift to be talking to you.
Jay Gange.
Sadhvi Jai Gange. Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati, PhD, is a renowned spiritual leader, author, and motivational speaker based in Rishikesh, India. She is the author of the newly released number one best-selling memoir, Hollywood to the Himalayas, a journey of healing and transformation. Originally from Los Angeles and a graduate of Stanford University, Sadhviji has been ordained into the sacred order of sannyas by her guru, His Holiness Pujya Swami Chidanand Saraswati ji, and has been living at Paramath Niketan Ashram for the past 25 years. She is the Secretary General of the Global Interfaith Wash Alliance, President of Divine Shakti Foundation, and Director of the world famous International Yoga Festival at Paramath Niketan Ashram, Rishikesh. She serves on the United Nations Advisory Council on Religion and on the steering committees of the International Partnership for Religion and Sustainable Development and the Moral Imperative to End Extreme Poverty, a campaign by the United Nations and World Bank. She's also the co president of Religions for Peace. She was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by US President Joe Biden for her lifelong commitment to volunteer service. She was also the managing editor for the monumental project of the 11-volume Encyclopedia of Hinduism. She oversees a variety of humanitarian projects, teaches meditation, lectures, writes, counsels individuals and families, and serves as a unique female voice of spiritual leadership throughout India and the world. Sadhviji, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Namaste. May
So
I
wonderful
begin?
to be together.
Yes. May I begin, Sadhviji?
Absolutely, of course.
Your book, Hollywood to the Himalayas, A Journey of Healing and Transformation, is a brutally honest book. I mean, it's everything's there, warts and all. So, what inspired to share for you to share the so-called dark details of your life? Did you not feel vulnerable? Did you not feel exposed? How did you do it?
It's it's a beautiful question, Archana, and yes, of course, I felt deeply vulnerable. I felt deeply open. As you know, here in India, across the world as well, but especially here in India, there's really a sort of a wall around much of the lives of our religious and spiritual leaders, in which personal details, especially those really vulnerable details around struggles and conflict or suffering or pain, these are not the sort of things that are made public. And for me, what I realized, as you mentioned, I've been here now actually this time, is that as the years went by and I started doing more and more speaking and teaching and leading and started to be more and more blessed to serve in this way, that I found that people were seeming to put me on a pedestal that kept me very separate from them. And so, for example, people would ask questions in satsang or in a question answer session that began with things like, well, I know that you're too pure to think like this, but, and then they'd ask their question. Or, I know that you would never struggle with this, but, and then they would ask their question. And it started to really trouble me because I felt like, first of all, it's definitely not true. But second of all, by believing that I have been cut from some different cloth, actually people are hindering their own spiritual progress. Because if we sit over here and we put somebody over there on a pedestal and we say they are qualitatively different than I am, they are cut from a different cloth, they are blessed in an entirely different way, then what it does is it keeps me very small, and it keeps me from stepping up to the plate of my life and embracing and embodying and realizing the fullness and the completeness and the divinity of myself. Then we become just the supplicants and the less worthy ones. And while humility is certainly not just beautiful, but essential on a spiritual path, it needs to be very delicately woven with an awareness of one's own purpose here, which is to know and experience the divinity of yourself, not just the divinity of someone else whom you are in awe of or whom you respect or revere or bow to, but of yourself. And when you think about a guru, we say, well, the word guru literally means in Sanskrit, the remover of darkness and the bringer of light. But the light that the guru brings should not be shining the light just on the guru. It's not about, oh, I'm bringing this light and here I'm going to shine this big flashlight on myself so that you can be impressed and in awe and revere me. The guru shines a light on the devotees, on the disciples. The guru shines the light on others so that they can actually see the light of themselves. That's the light the guru shows us, is the light of our own self. So I realized that this separation, this idealization, this sort of very small framed personality that people were seeing me as just this kind of angelic, untouched, virginal being who had sort of descended from the Stanford clouds onto the banks of Mother Ganga, was not only really untrue, but it was not helpful to people on their path. And that I really needed for people to know that I know suffering, I know difficulty, I know challenge, and I know freedom and peace and joy. And what that means is that so can you. That if I, having experienced what I experienced, having struggled the way that I struggled, if I could let go and actually have that means clearly beyond any doubt that grace does not discriminate, that there are no prerequisites. I was not a sadhak. I was not a meditator. I was not someone who abstained from anything for any reason. I was never someone who had ever even thought about the value of abstinence. And yet, grace is still there. And to me, that teaching is just so critical for everyone, which is wherever you are, whatever has happened to you, whatever you've done, whether you got up and meditated today or not, whether you have paid your taxes or not, whether you've read a spiritual book or you only read romance novels, whatever your life is, you are not disqualified from grace. Grace is there and available for you, and who you are is divine. And your purpose in life is to know that and realize that and experience that. And if I can, so can you.
Beautiful. How beautiful is that? Sadhviji, you were actually a 25-year-old PhD student of psychology at Stanford University and also from a very highly privileged background. And when you backpacked to India with no particular agenda, inside you were deeply suffering. And then you met Pujya Swamiji Chidananda Saraswati and were led to a magical moment of healing and transformation. Can you share your experience of letting go?
Absolutely. It was by far one of the most important moments of my life. I mean, next to the moment of standing on the banks of Mother Ganga when I first got to Rishikesh and having that experience of oneness and awakening, or whatever semantics we put on it, next to that, the moment of letting go was the most powerful moment of my life, because I had spent the first 25 years really identifying as this body, as this story. I identified as my weight. When it was low, I felt happy. When it was higher, I felt not happy. I identified as, my complexion. If it was tainted by a pimple or a few, I felt not happy. If it was clear, I felt happy. If my hair looked good that day, I felt happy. If it was wild and untamable, then I felt unhappy. I identified based on the way that other people treated me. So if people looked at me with love, with respect, with a sense of value, then I felt like I was valuable, that I was worthy of love, that I was worthy of friendship. And if they didn't, then I felt like I wasn't. My entire self identity was really wrapped up in the grades I got in school, the number that I ranked. Being number one, I felt great. Not being number one, I didn't feel so good. And so I was wrapped up in all of this ignorance of I am this body. I am the way people look at me, the way people talk to me, the way people see me. I am my grades. I am my success. And I am my history. That which has happened to me, the abuse I had suffered, the abandonment I had suffered, the eating disorder I had struggled with, that I felt like I am those things. So I really identified as all of that. And so if you met me and you said, tell me about yourself, well, depending on how open with you I felt, I would share with you what I had struggled with, what I had experienced. I would give you my role in society. I'm a student and I'm a straight A student and I'm taking, 21 units a quarter and I'm the top student in my class and I'm all of this and I'm, these are my relationships. And I would give you all of this, which we consider ignorance. We say agyan or avidya, the opposite of wisdom, the opposite of knowledge. I identified as the false self, the physical body, the thoughts in my brain, the emotions in my brain, the history of this physical body. And therefore I suffered like we all suffer. And when I came here to Rishikesh and I finally met the incredible being who would later become my guru, His Holiness Pujya Swami Chidananda Saraswati Ji, the president of Parmarth Nikatan. It was the first time that we were speaking alone together. And I asked him about fear, because stress was always a major thing for me. Fear was always a major thing for me. And he said, you fear because you don't trust. And so I gave him my story. Here's my story. Here's the abuse that I suffered. Here's the abandonment I suffered. Here's the other challenges that I suffered. Here's how I, in my way, tried to deal with that suffering through addiction. And it was a story that had always gotten me a lot of sympathy. It was a story that anybody else who had heard it always responded with some variation of, oh, you poor thing. It's so beautiful that you managed to get out of bed every day unaided by medication. It's, so wonderful that you are making something of your life. But it's not a story that ever made anybody ask more of me. And Puja Swamiji looked at me and he said, are you going to take that to the grave? I was 25. He said, are you going to take that to the grave with you? I said, God, no, of course. He said, so are you going to let it go on your deathbed? How about a month before you die? Maybe a week before you die? And I said, God, no, Swamiji, I'm in process. I'm in treatment. I'm in therapy. And eventually I will heal. I will be able to let go and move on. And he looked at me and he said, you're waiting for someone to draw the line, for someone else to come in and say, you can be done. He said, no one will. It's up to you. You can take this pain to your grave. You can let it go on your deathbed, or you can let it go tonight. And I thought, tonight? He said, yes, we have this beautiful arti ceremony on the banks of Ganga, this lighting ceremony. He said, and after you offer the oil lamp to the sacred mother goddess in the form of Mother Ganga, the sacred river, I want you to walk into Ganga and I want you to offer to her all of your pain, all of your anger, all of your struggles. And I remember I spent the rest of the day thinking, a river? Just give it to a river, like somehow a river was going to sweep away my problems. I mean, I was a psychology PhD student. We were being trained in half a dozen different methodologies of working with trauma, struggle, addiction, depression. You don't just give your stuff to a river. And somewhere around late afternoon, early evening, I made a vow. And the vow was that even though I knew it wasn't going to work, I was going to do it sincerely. That out of just respect for this incredible being who had given me this instruction, that I would just do it sincerely. I knew it wouldn't work, but I would stop mocking it. And so after the arti, I walked into Ganga. And I have no idea how long I stood there, but I stood there and I prayed and I cried. And I prayed and I cried. And I really tried to pull from within me every bit of pain, of anger, of longing, every memory that I had that caused the pain and the anger. Memories that I had that would send me spiraling, to really try to pull them as much as I could out of me and to offer them into the water in my hands, as he had said, and then to pour that water back into Ganga. And I did that, again, I don't know how long it was a long time. But what I can tell you is, amazingly, she took it. And I felt it happen. I felt that awareness that it actually had been taken. And again, the overeducated, over-indoctrinated, obviously it's not actually gone. You've just had this beautiful spiritual experience. Days and weeks and even months trying to kind of trigger myself again, as crazy as that sounds, but just to convince myself, to show myself that it hadn't really been given, that she hadn't really taken it, that I was as sick as I thought I would. Trigger myself again. The memories, of course, were still there, but the emotional pain that was attached to the memory, being sucked out of my body, that sense of victimization, that sense of identification with the child to whom this had happened, that was no longer there. And it's been now 26 years. And it's been miraculous. And what it's made me realize is that while therapy, psychology, all of this is the power of spiritual ritual, in addition to, I certainly would never, importance of a powerful ritual that enables us to actually shift things, that gets us in touch with aspects of us that are not the thinking mind, that are not the condition. That soul, that spirit, which has never been abused or abandoned or betrayed or lied to or harmed or cheated. That untouched, pure, depressed or addicted. But it enables us to get in touch with that part of us that isn't a victim of the happenings of the world around us. And that letting go has just been, as I said, the most powerful thing in the world, because usually what we do is we hold on to our grudges, and it defines us, it ruins us, it keeps us stuck. I always say, somebody has harmed you enough, whatever they did to you, that harm is done. But now when we hold that grudge, when we hold the anger, really what we end up doing is offering our own life's freedom, our own life's joy, peace, meaning on the altar of someone else's ignorance, ego, arrogance, violence, confusion, fear. Like, they, in their ignorance and violence and fear, they harmed us. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to ruin somebody else's life. They're besieged by their own karmic package and all of that which it doesn't include that it should have included. And in the midst of being besieged by their own anger and fear and confusion and regret and impatience and depression and ignorance, in the midst of that, they harm us. They do things that harm us. They don't address life situations skillfully, lovingly, consciously. Old, unconscious, unkind way of living, we get hurt. But for us then to take the rest of our lives and offer it to them willingly on the altar of that confusion of theirs, of that ego or arrogance or fear of theirs, is nonsensical. All of us do. So I feel so deeply blessed to be given at such a young age that very clear and emphatic and powerful teaching of letting go.
How beautiful is that? In fact, Pujya Swamiji's words keep ringing in my mind. When I read that for the first time, it's so beautiful and life transforming. And it transformed you so much that you decided to stay back and you didn't go. But
Yes.
becoming a monastic renunciate, I mean, you were from Hollywood. There was all the glitz and glamour so that you were accustomed to. Weren't you afraid to embrace what was it? I mean, a life of austerity? Must have been tough.
Yes, you would think, of course, that it would be very difficult. And I would have even thought, if you had said to me prior to me coming to India, prior to me having these experiences, that this was the life I was going to be living, I also would have thought very difficult. But the truth of life really is that we yearn for things that we yearn for. We're drawn to things that we're drawn to because we believe they will make us happy. And so people who are running after glitter and glamour, people who are running after money and privilege and opportunity and possessions, are doing so because on some level they believe, if I have these things, these actual possessions or this job or this social status, then I will actually be happy. And for me, when I came here, the joy that I experienced, the bliss that I experienced was so powerful and so much more than any happiness I had ever experienced before, that just even from a purely scientific standpoint, I mean, I was a scientist. And for me, it was undeniable that the facts showed that this life, even without any of the comfort or luxury or anything, brought me so much more deep joy than anything I had had before. So naturally, I was drawn to, I want to stay here. Our electricity just went out. I'll just hang here for a minute till the light comes back on and then pick up again from here.
That happened to me in the morning.
It
We
happens
didn't have
here all the
electricity for
time.
4 hours.
I was drawn to want to be in this life that brought me so much more happiness, so much more joy than anything that I had ever experienced. And in terms of actual sannyas, actual monastic renunciation, that was really just a very natural progression for me. From the moment that I first stood on the banks of Ganga, through absolutely no merit of my own, all of the desires for things that my new life on the banks of Ganga at Parmarth Nikatan, even prior to becoming a monastic, but all of the things that my new life was not going to include, suddenly the desire for those things literally just vanished. I always say it feels like God came through me with a vacuum cleaner, with one of those, the long extensions that you use to get into the little corners, or a high powered dustbuster that gets into all the little corners, the nooks and crannies. And as though God just literally vacuumed out of me desire for everything ranging from sex to bagels and everything in between. Like all the things that no longer were going to be part of my life. That desire just dissipated. And so taking sannyas was something that I had already been living it since I got here. And the actual official renunciation was just a very powerful, very sacred, very holy official kind of reinforcement of a life that I was already living and that I knew that I was meant to live. And of course, as you've read Hollywood to the Himalayas, you know that there were moments later on after officially taking sannyas in which suddenly I found myself full of desire, like out of the blue. And it's important because spirituality and a commitment to spirituality does not render us inhuman. It does not somehow immediately render us emotionless, desireless, lustless, greedless, angerless. And we still have to do the work. Even when we've had experiences that are as undoubtedly powerful as I had. And so when I had those feelings arise and I was able to go to Puja Swamiji and tell him, he gave me some very powerful meditative practices to actually work with those energies so that rather than being hindrances or rather than being something that distracts you or makes you feel badly or that you have to fight against, it's just energy. Energy is just energy. And you can actually harness that energy and use that energy, raising it up into a beautiful spiritual heart energy rather than stay focused on it as an energy of sexual desire. So, yeah, this was definitely not a life that I 30 years ago would have thought I would be living. And yet, it's been so divinely blessed and such a blessing that along the way, I feel so grateful that actually so many of the steps have been made accessible to me. Someone who I never would have thought that a life of abstinence was accessible to me. And it's been not only accessible, but really quite simple and actually really quite beautiful, because that which we're really longing for, joy, peace, deep connection, ecstasy, oneness, fulfillment, meaning, is something that a spiritual life provides us. Provides it in a different way, of course, than a householder life, but it provides it in a way.
Uh, but can anybody have access to the kind of grace that was bestowed on you, or do you have to be special? Or is it necessary to be a conscious seeker? And do you need a guru to handhold you? Or is it possible to do it by just trusting?
So, first of all, anyone can do it. We are all special. The divine lives in each of us. Every one of us is a chosen one. As I began with, grace does not discriminate. God does not play favorites. All you need is that sincere yearning, that sincere desire. But you also need a very sincere and very pragmatic ability to make choices. So, for example, you cannot simultaneously walk north and walk south at the same time. You've got to decide, I'm standing in one place, either I'm going to head north or I'm going to head south. You can't do both. And so, if I'm going to commit to a spiritual life, it doesn't mean I can't go for pizza. It doesn't mean I can't go to the movies. It doesn't mean that I can't live a householder life if that's my dharma. But it means I need to commit to spirituality. And all that means is there's two ways of moving through the world. One is what you could consider the material way, and this is what I call the Hollywood way. So when I talk about Hollywood to the Himalayas, there's two arcs. One is the very physical arc that I actually walked in my journey. But the other is the arc of a mindset shift. And that's something that everyone, wherever you are, whatever your dharma may be, that everyone can make that shift. And so what I call the Hollywood mindset is the shift, is the mindset that says you are a body. You are its size, its shape, its color, its history, its career, its bank account, its relationships. You are that. That's the world of matter, material. I am this physical body. Its size, its shape, its color, its role. And this physical body ends here. And then there's empty space. And then your physical body begins there, and it's got a size, a shape, a color, a story, a role. And then you end. And then there's space. And then the next person begins. And so that perspective keeps us separate. It keeps us separate from our true self, which is actually not matter, but spirit. It keeps us separate from each other, because as long as I think I'm an object and I'm over here, I begin and end here, and you're an object over there, well, we're separate. See, there's all this empty space between us. But if I realize I am spirit, and this is the spiritual way of looking at the world rather than the material way, or what I would call the Himalayan way of thinking rather than the Hollywood way, says you have a body, but you're not the body. The body is beautiful, it's wonderful, it is your medium for awakening. It's your medium for interacting with the divine creation. But you're not the body. And since you are not the body, rather than identifying as it and therefore suffering and causing suffering to others, recognize that ultimately you're spirit. There is no place I end and you begin. The same spirit that flows through me flows through you. There's no empty space between us. And of course, one of the things that I love with my background in science is when science and spirituality overlap. And this is a great example of that, because if you look at me with your naked eye, very poor tools of sight, yeah, it looks like I end right here. But if you look at me under an electron microscope, a much more powerful tool of sight, you realize there's no boundary to me. I'm just whirling, twirling energy. There's no boundary to you. You're whirling, twirling energy. There is no place I end and you begin. And that's really what spirituality is about. So to live spiritually simply means I commit in whatever my dharma may be, whatever my life path may be, I commit to focusing on spirit rather than matter, to self-identifying as spirit, as soul, as consciousness, as love, rather than as the physical body. And when I see you, that instead of seeing you as an object, I'm going to see you as spirit. And then suddenly, rather than seeing other people as objects to be either used for my benefit in some way or to be removed. Because when something's an object, it serves only two purposes. Either I can use it for my enjoyment, for my pleasure, or to get ahead, to achieve my goals, or it's a hurdle, it's an obstacle, and I need to remove it from my path. But when I stop seeing you as an object and I see you as spirit, then I realize you and I are one. You're not something for me to use or push away. We're one. And that's the spiritual way. So yes, everyone can do it. We are all chosen. It just requires that commitment that I'm going to focus on content rather than form. I'm going to focus on essence rather than size and shape.
Thank you for that. In 2013, at a Kumbh Mela camp, you were escorted off the stage because among 60 of India's most respected religious leaders, you were the only woman present. Did this gender discrimination not infuriate you? Did you not want to protest? So, do you see things changing, or does being a woman in spiritual India come with these irritants?
So, yeah, it was an enormous stage, at least 60, maybe even significantly more than that. It was a massive, massive stage. And what I was told, which for me was really the core of it, was you need to sit in the audience. And of course, they said we've made a special chair and we've covered the chair, and there's the asana on the chair, as respectful as they could be. But they said you need to be off the stage because this is a Mahatma stage. Now, in Sanskrit, Mahatma literally means great soul. It doesn't mean man. There's no gender to a great soul. But the implication is Mahatma means men. And it was such a powerful moment for me because there's really two ways that most of us go. One is, as you say, to be infuriated, to be indignant. How dare you? Am I not a great soul? Are we not all one soul anyway? Is this all not illusion? I mean, I could have given a whole spiritual speech on Advaita and Vedanta and how anyway there is no male and there is no female and we're all just soul. And there's all kinds of things that in one's indignation that you could do. And the other way that we sometimes respond is in that breath-stopping insult and injury, that sense of we've literally been punched in the solar plexus and you cannot breathe and you feel like you're just gonna crumble and slither off the face of the earth. And those seem to be, in general, the two ways that most of us respond to that type of insult, you could say. And of course, my initial reaction was both of those, a very quick fluctuation between the two. Part of my brain was planning the lecture that I was going to give. A part of me felt punched in the stomach, especially because of my love and reverence for the saint whose stage it was, in the sense of deep hurt that on his stage such a thing could happen. But instead, by God's grace, what I found myself doing was I didn't go and sit on the chair in the audience. Instead, I went and I sat on the banks of the Sangam, banks of the river. It was midday. It was mostly empty there. And I sat alone on the banks of where Ma Ganga meets Ma Yamuna, meets Ma Saraswati. And amidst my tears, I found myself in a very deep meditative space because there wasn't room in me for all of the things I was feeling. Undeniably, I love and respect and revere the saint whose stage that was. And even though I had just been kicked off it, surely with his knowledge and approval, it didn't wipe out the love and reverence that I feel for him. So on the one hand, I had this incredible love and reverence for that saint, a deep love and reverence for Sanatan Dharma, for Bhartiya Sanskriti, for this culture, this land, this tradition, this wisdom. And a deep love and reverence for my female body. And no, I'm not praying to be reincarnated as a man. I don't see that as a higher form of incarnation. And how to make space for all of these seemingly conflicting experiences. I mean, either they are right, as in there is something lower about being female, or I am right, and there is something equally beautiful and powerful and divine about being female, which would make them wrong. But I knew that neither was wrong, that it wasn't a matter of either or. It was actually a matter of both, and that my job in that moment was to expand the limitations of my own self that seemed to turn the situation into either or, right or wrong. And I sat there and I meditated until I was anchored and connected in a much more oceanic consciousness, in which my love and reverence for this saint, my love and reverence for Sanatan Dharma, for India, and my love and reverence for not only the divine feminine and the mother goddess, but for my very human female body, until all of that could coexist. And I've realized in all of the years since then that that really is what it's about for me. It's not about someone being wrong. And yeah, it is difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying I don't think it should be changed. I think it should be changed. And for that reason, I actually find myself going to a lot of events that I wouldn't necessarily go to, because I know that I'm going to be the only woman on that stage. And because I think it's critically important that we have women on stages. And so there are gatherings, there are programs that normally I might not take the time to actually go to travel to, but that I do, knowing if I don't go, there likely will not be a woman on that stage. And just on the off chance that there's a girl or a woman watching this in the audience or on TV who's been told that the world of religion is not a woman's world, I want her to see me, and I want her to know it is her world. And wherever I have the opportunity, I speak about this dichotomy. It's not something that I shy away from. But things need to change with respect. They need to change with patience. They need to change with a sense of it's all us rather than us versus them. It's not about now us, the feminists over here, fighting the men over there. That just creates more separation. It creates more of the same problem. The transformation and the change needs to happen when we realize we're all in this together. As women, how can we bring ourselves, our lowercase s self, our individual human self, as well as our higher self, the soul, the spirit, the consciousness, into this world with as much presence and power as we can? I mean, Shakti is the energy of creation. It's the energy of everything. Shrishti, the creation, feminine, prakriti, nature, feminine. It's all feminine. We're about to start Navaratri, this worship of the mother goddess. It's all feminine. And so what we need as the actual physical embodiments of that feminine is not to make it more about us versus them, but rather to bring that Shakti and also that Yukti, that wisdom, that proper planning, that proper way, so that ultimately we can change things. But again, things change when we are anchored and grounded and connected and peaceful, not when we are indignant and feel like all of our breath has been punched out of us. That's the time to meditate. And when we meditate, we get connected to the divine flow. And then we're actually able to be efficient and effective agents of change. Otherwise, all we're agents of is broadcasting our own anger. And that's not what changes things. What changes things is effectiveness, efficiency, connection, being a channel for that flow of the divine, that flow of the divine feminine. So that's what I've really committed myself to being, is not a voice of anger and indignation, but a voice of the very proud embodiment of the divine feminine, who is not less than the masculine, and who is an embodiment of love, consciousness, reverence, devotion, and power. And slowly, 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 I think together as all of the Shakti together, we can really bring about this change when we do it as all us, rather than just creating more and more thicker and thicker lines between us and them.
On that beautiful, empowering note, thank you, Sadhvi ji, for this wonderful conversation. And thank you for all the equanimity lessons that I learned today in the face of internet issues and electricity issues. Thank you so much. I'm so blessed to have been talking.